Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. Today, I want to talk to you about my 3 favorite tabletop war games: Warhammer 40k, Bolt Action, and The Old World. It's no secret that I love all of these games, but I enjoy them for a variety of different reasons. Each one scratches a different itch. So join me as I explore and explain what draws me to each one of these games. And so without further ado, let's fix bayonets and charge right into today's episode. Attention conscripts, I am excited to announce the launch of the official second Mordian Glory channel. If you're curious, click on the link down in the description and head over to Mordian Glory Games. I upload to the channel several times a week with all sorts of fun and silly gaming content. So if you're jonesing for even more Mordian Glory content, then head on over to Mordian Glory Games and don't forget to subscribe. First up, let's tackle the big boy, Warhammer 40k. From the setting, to the lore, to the tabletop game, I love everything about Warhammer 40k. But out of all of those things, I have to say, I enjoy playing 40k more than anything else. I, of course, have read my fair share of lore, and I enjoy exploring the setting in various ways, but it's the playing of the game that has always drawn me to it. And specifically, I really like how 40k has become more competitive and more balance focused over the last few years. As someone who has played this game for about 20 years and competitively for the last decade, I have seen it go through a lot of changes, and it used to be an unbalanced mess. I always use this as an example, but there used to be lists where you could take 10 Riptides, and each one of those Riptides could fire 4 times in a turn. That's 40 Riptides worth of firepower. And there was no terrain on the board, so everyone just got blasted off in like one turn. But over the course of 8th, 9th and 10th edition, the game has become increasingly more competitive and balance focused. Some people don't like this about the setting, but for someone like me whose primary engagement with the whole thing is playing it, I think it's made the game far, far more enjoyable. And it's the reason why I keep coming back to it. And it's the reason why I go to a 40k tournament every single month, because I know that I can go there, take an army, and have a fair shot of putting up a good fight in any game and have a ton of fun whilst doing it. And there's still lots of epic moments to be had. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things about 40k which I think could be improved. Personally, I am not a fan of the fixed points for each unit. I liked it when there were granular points, and I do think that a lot of character has been lost from the game and a lot of flavor has been taken out of the rules in order to try and make it a bit more balanced. But these are flies in the ointment, and honestly, they are sacrifices that, as a player, I'm willing to endure if it means that the game that I actually get to play feels more fun and engaging. But if I had to pick one thing that I enjoy about 40k the most, it's how widespread it has become and how easy it is to find a game and play in a tournament. Back in the day, there would be a couple of tournaments that you would look forward to each year. A couple of big GTs maybe in your local area, and that was about it. Now, every single weekend, if I want to, I can go to a tournament. And no matter where I live, this may not be true where you are, but in the UK at the very least, no matter where I live, wherever I move to, there's a thriving 40k scene. I will move to a new town or I'll go to a new area and there'll be a game shop. There'll be people playing this game. And so it's never been more accessible and it's never been easier to just pick up and play. And like I said, as someone who's a player, that's awesome. One last thing to mention about 40k is it is constantly in a state of flux. Some people see this as a good thing, some people see this as a very frustrating and bad thing. What I mean by this is the game is constantly being updated and pushed forward. Either it's going to be a new model or a new faction, or there's going to be a new codex, or there's going to be a balance patch to the rules, or there's going to be a points change. In some capacity or another, not a week goes by without there being some new news to talk about with 40k. Now, as someone who is locked in, I find this a really good thing. It keeps the game constantly fresh and interesting, and if I go to a tournament and I counter that's completely broken, I know that by the time I go to my next tournament, it's probably going to be patched out. But for some people, they find this really difficult. If they're not completely locked in, then it means that by the time they've built up their army, maybe over the course of 6 months to a year, then it's out of date. Maybe the points have gone down, so they're like, well, what was the 2,000 point army? It's now only 1,500 points. I've got to go out and buy more models now. Or the vision that they had for that army has been shattered because it was a 2,000 point army and now it's 2,500 points and they can't use it, and all of the cool tricks they'd come up with no longer really work. Depending on how committed and how into it and how much you're no-lifing the game will determine which side of the fence you come down with this. And whilst, like I said, I personally like it, I totally get and totally understand why other people can be very frustrated with this aspect of the game. Bringing all of this together, the reason I love 40k so much is it really scratches that competitive itch I have. But now let's move on to the second game that I play, and that is Bolt Action. Bolt Action is a World War II skirmish game that lets you play as almost any of the major or minor factions involved in humanity's greatest and largest conflict. Whether you want to play as the Germans desperately trying to hold off a Soviet attack, or as the Americans storming the beaches at Normandy, Bolt Action has got you covered. One of the best things about Bolt Action is it doesn't allow itself to be constrained by the history. Whenever I've played some other historical war games, I found that I have to essentially recreate battles that took place. So I'll be doing the Battle of Hastings, or I'll be doing the Battle of Waterloo. But with Bolt Action, it's very much a pick up beer and pretzels skirmish game. You can have the US Airborne fighting against the Japanese, even though they weren't in the Pacific. Or you can have the US Marines fighting against the Germans, even though they were never really in Europe. The system is eminently flexible. If you want to be more historical, you can be. You can still recreate these scenarios, and in fact, Warlord Games has an expansive series of campaign books for all the different theatres. But if you just want to throw some dice and not worry too much about the historicalness and really just enjoy the game and its mechanics, you can do that no problem. But it's those aforementioned mechanics that I think is the strongest and most appealing thing about Bolt Action for me. In games like Warhammer, you have an I go, you go system. I'm going to go with all of my units in my turn, and then I'm going to hand over to you, and you're going to go with all of your units in your turn. Whilst quite simple, that does mean there are large parts of the game when you're just not engaged. You're just watching your opponent move their stuff and then roll their dice. And maybe if you're lucky, you might get to roll some armor saves, but that's about it. And then on the flip side, your opponent is having to wait around whilst you do your entire turn. But in Bolt Action, you have a pseudo alternating activation system. Now, it's a little tricky to describe, but I'll do my best. Essentially, for each unit in your army, you get a dice. So if I've got 10 units in my army, I'll get 10 dice. If my opponent's got 12 units in their army, they'll get 12 dice. Now, these dice need to be different colours for each player. So let's define the Germans. I'll have grey dice. And if my opponent is Brits, they will have green dice. And we take all of those dice and we put them into a dice bag. And we mix them all together. And then each player takes it in turns to reach into the bag without looking and pull out a dice. So even if I'm Germans, and like I said, I've got grey dice, if I reach into that bag and pull out a green dice, my opponent will get to activate one of their units. So it's kind of like alternating activations because you take it in turns to reach in, and ideally you pick out one of your dice and they pick out one of their dice, but it's got a little bit extra spice and flavor added to it because sometimes you might get a little bit of a rush on, and sometimes you might really need to activate a unit, but your opponent pulls out one of their dice instead. And it makes for a very engaging game because you're constantly doing something. You're doing one unit, and then they're doing one unit, and then you're doing one unit, and then maybe they get a rush on, and then maybe you're desperate for the next dice, and it creates heady heights and terrible lows, and it creates great excitement throughout the game. But not only is Bolt Action an eminently exciting and engaging game system, it's also a rather affordable one. In comparison to 40k, where you might spend £300, £400, £500 on getting a 2,000 point army together, in Bolt Action you can buy a all-encompassing starter army which will have a genuinely useful selection of viable units, typically about 100. And that's if you buy new in box from Warlord. There's plenty of third-party retailers where you can get a 10 or 15% discount on that. And to be clear, this isn't because Bolt Action is a much smaller game system that requires less models. These army sets are just phenomenal deals. For example, in the Soviet starter set, you get a big tank like a KV-1, you'll get all the officers, you'll get machine guns, you'll get mortars, and you'll get 80 infantry. And for the Winter German starter set, you'll get 48 infantry, again, machine guns, mortars, officers, and you'll get a tank, and you'll get another vehicle as well. They're just a good deal. And to give you an example of how good it feels to get one of these box sets and how addictive it is just opening up a large box of models, I got into Bolt Action proper seriously at the beginning of this year. And in the last 12 to 18 months, I've gone from having one army to 6. And they're all pretty expansive, and it's just because it always feels like a good deal when you pick yourself up another big box set of models. If there was one downside to Bolt Action, it's that it's not quite as widespread as something like Warhammer 40k. You will have some towns and cities which have a thriving Bolt Action scene, and then you'll have others where it's just non-existent and it can be really difficult to get a game. One thing I tend to find with Bolt Action is it is played in close-knit friend groups, and people sort of just play against each other, and they use it as a game to blow off some steam and have some fun. It's definitely not as competitive, and it's certainly not as balanced as something like 40k, but it is a phenomenally fun system, and for me, I use it as a palate cleanser. If I'm getting a little bit sick of the competitive 40k grind, and I need something that is just a lot different and a ton of fun, Bolt Action is my go-to game, and it really scratches that itch. But last and certainly not least, we have got Warhammer The Old World. Old World is the relaunched and in many ways remastered Warhammer Fantasy game. Fantasy was discontinued by Games Workshop about 8 years ago, and instead they went with a game called Age of Sigmar. But after many years of the community clamoring for good old fantasy to come back, the game that started Warhammer in general, for those that don't know, fantasy existed before 40k, it is now back and with a vengeance. And I'm just going to say it right now, I think that Warhammer The Old World is the best game that Games Workshop makes right now. Not only do you have an incredibly rich setting for your players to explore and immerse themselves in, but you've also got a very deep and complicated, while surprisingly easy to learn set of rules. Seriously, after a couple of turns of Old World, most players have picked up about 90% of the game, and it's only the really nitty-gritty stuff or some of the complicated battlefield situations that come up that you really need to start diving into the rulebook for. Fantasy rules embody that old adage of being easy to learn and yet hard to master. Most people will be able to play the game on a very casual level, just pushing their models around, rolling some dice, having a few beers and pretzels, and just loving and laughing at the epic moments. But if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, and you want to get competitive with it, then it lends itself to that as well. And it is a game that, if you like to try and be a skillful player, it can be very rewarding. Small side note here, but I know a lot of Warhammer 40k players who have come over to Warhammer The Old World and have just been utterly addicted and utterly hooked by it, because they can really flex those brain muscles, and they can really get into the skill of the game and the nuance of it and the play and counterplay. It is as deep as you want it to be, but if you just want a casual game, it completely accommodates that as well. Another big positive for this game is it's quite affordable, especially in comparison to 40k. In fact, I would put its price point as somewhere between that game and Bolt Action. There are some ways of getting into the game really affordably. For example, you can get a Warriors of Chaos battalion that will give you a full 2,000 point army for about £100. But typically you're probably going to spend between £150 and £200 on your Old World army, which is a lot less than 40k, but it's not quite as cheap as getting into Bolt Action. You just tend to find that the boxes come with a lot more models as well. For example, you're going to get your squads of goblins, not in units of 10, but 40. And you're going to find orcs and other heavy infantry like Warriors of Chaos coming in boxes of between 20 and 30 guys. Some people might deride the game by saying the models are cheaper because they're old, but I actually see that as a big positive. And this is genuinely positive, not just me coping here, guys. Firstly, they are super easy to build. Seriously, have you ever tried to build a box of Warhammer 40k infantry recently without using the instructions? It's impossible. The models are broken down into minute parts and they are arranged on the sprue in a way that only an insane person could make sense of. But with Old World, you don't need instructions to build almost any of the models. Get yourself a box of goblins, orcs, chaos, almost anything, dwarves, and you will just find the instructions just left on the side and you'll be able to build them all without the instructions, and they're really quick and simple to go together. It makes for getting your models built and painted very quickly, which means you can start playing with awesome looking armies fast. And of course, the models being older are pure nostalgia. That is one of the biggest draws to me. Being able to rebuild those armies that I had as a kid and just chowing down on those member berries. And it reminds me of that scene in the film Step Brothers where they're like, oh my god, can you imagine if we had these when we were kids? Even better, we got them when we're 40. But if you pin me down and force me to pick one thing that I love about Old World more than anything else, it is the flavor and the narrative of the game. Every single rule comes with a little bit of flavor text, not just the models, every single rule, every piece of equipment. And speaking of equipment, you have got granular points, so you can really build and customize your characters. This is something that I think is missing from 40k and missing a little bit from Bolt Action. You don't have those characters that you really pour your heart and your soul into. I have built a lot of different characters for my Old World armies, but they're all unique. And when I put them on the tabletop, I have little names for them. I know it sounds really crazy, but you can just really invest so much in this army from like an emotional point of view. And the game has got so much soul. And it doesn't take itself too seriously either. One of my favorite things in Old World is something called the pigeon bombs. This is an upgrade for Empire engineers. And like I said, it's got some flavor text attached to the rule. Pigeon bombs. Many engineers experiment with the idea that homing pigeons can be trained to deliver bombs to the enemy, but most such research ends with a feathery blast and a burning loft. I mean, you would just never find a bit of flavor text like that in 40k. And then when you go through the results of how pigeon bombs actually work, you've got like a pigeon bomb table. You roll a d6 each time you try and shoot with the weapon, and then you consult the table to see what the pigeon does. On a 1, the result is bird brain. Confused by the tumult of the battle, the pigeon returns to its handler, and then the handler basically gets hit by the blast. On a 2 to 3, fly away home. Perhaps wisely, the pigeon sets off towards the distant horizon. The bomb has no effect. I'm not paraphrasing there. That is the exact words of the text. And then you've got dud. The pigeon drops its package over its target, but the bomb fails to detonate, instead falling towards Earth with tremendous speed. Basically, you just brain an enemy model with one lump of metal. And you've got perfect delivery, where it's quite dry. It's quite dark humor, the perfect delivery flavor text. It just says, the pigeon delivers its package. Place a small 3-inch blast template so it's holding directly over the center of the target. It doesn't need to say anymore. It just goes, the pigeon's mission went well, but not for the pigeon. You know, you can sort of read between the lines and get a good chuckle out of it. If I was to have any criticism of Old World, I would say that it's like Bolt Action, it's just not as widespread as something like 40k, and so sometimes it can be difficult to find a game if there isn't a local scene. But one thing I have found with Old World is once you get someone to try the game, it's like they become addicted to it, especially 40k players. So sometimes you need to be the change that you want to see, and sometimes you need to be the driving force. And with Old World, it only takes a little push before people start picking up on what you're putting down. And I have seen many Old World communities snowball quickly just because one person took the plunge and managed to get a couple of people to try the game out. So let's bring all of this together. I love 40k because it scratches that competitive itch, even if it does leave my wallet hurting. I love Bolt Action because it's a fantastic palate cleanser, it's really engaging, and it's damn affordable. And I love Old World because it allows me to forge the narrative unlike any other game that I have played, and if I want to, it's still got a competitive edge to it. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. I know some people are going to be asking, Mordian, why didn't you compare any of these games to AOS or include AOS in the mix? That's just because honestly I don't play that game, although I am becoming a little bit AOS curious and I may be looking at trying it out at some point in the future if I can find the time. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button and of course subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bonbon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.